Chapter 8 of Travels and Adventures of an Orchid Hunter by Albert Millican. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Shooting the Rapids. Next day we came to some rapids which extended a considerable distance, where the water rushed down a declivity with terrific velocity. Here the natives were obliged to bring the canoe to the bank on the shallowest side, and, all jumping into the water, literally lifted the boat up through the foaming torrent, wading up to the neck in the water, and making a great noise, shouting to each other in their bad Spanish by way of encouragement. When we had got clear of the rapids we stopped to rest, and while we were there 3 canoes, laden with coffee, came down the river and joined us. I was curious to see how they would shoot the rapids, a mile of rushing, foaming torrent, intersected at intervals by enormous trunks of trees, which at some time or other had been brought down the stream, and were now firmly embedded in the banks. These obstacles caused the angry weight of water to eddy and boil like a monster cauldron. The principal danger to the canoes shooting these rapids is the probability of being dashed to pieces against some of these hidden destroyers. The boatmen seemed to understand fully their desperate danger, and as the first canoe moved away from the bank I could hear them encouraging each other. The first canoe was loaded with 40 bags of coffee, and no sooner was the frail bark pushed off from the side than it was caught in the current. The descent from where we were to the still waters below occupied about 5 minutes, and so great was the velocity that had the canoe only jarred with any of the projections of the banks it must inevitably have been dashed to pieces. But the skill of the natives is so great that they guided the whole of the canoes safely into the calmer waters below, and once clear of their danger gave an exulting shout which we could hear above the roar of the rapids. After little more progress, night came upon us again. I had been fortunate through the day in shooting some ducks, so we had no lack of food. Next day we started by daybreak, and as we neared the higher part of the river we found it in many places very shallow, and on this account we had a piece of sport which was quite new to me. This was a race with a large fish, called by the natives savallo, somewhat like a salmon. They seemed to be fond of feeding in the shallows on the edge of the sandbanks, and at a considerable distance away we could see their movements in the water, so directly we brought the canoe opposite to them the boatmen jumped into the river and gave chase, driving them as much as possible into the shallowest part. The chase was most exciting. 6 natives to 4 fish, dodging each other with such surprising agility that they only lost one, the others being killed by a stroke of the machete, which the natives use with such dexterity. It was impossible for me to learn the scientific name of this beautiful fish. It is very symmetrical in form, about 2 feet and a half in length, and is covered with scales of a peculiar shape and enormous size, each one larger than a crown, and glittering like burnished silver. I have seen the same fish grow to a size of 7 feet long and 2 feet 6 inches in girth. When cooked it proved somewhat unsavory, and considerably less palatable than beautiful. About midday on the 6th day from starting we arrived at the foot of the Andes, and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, after great cheering and salutation from one lot of boatmen to another, we landed at the port called Botijas. No very inviting place, but at least a relief to get liberty from the cramping confinement of the canoe. A large sheet iron warehouse and a few miserable thatched huts are all that the inhabitants can boast of to make up their village. This place has proved the most unhealthy. 1 or 2 Colombians are placed here by the merchants of the interior to look after the despatch of cargo by the canoes. These poor fellows are only able to stay about a month, and then seek the higher ground to recruit themselves from the terrible malarial fever which inevitably fastens itself upon them. All the produce going down the river in canoes arrives here on mules, and some hundreds may be seen at a time loading and unloading bags of coffee, bales of gutta percha, or cases of plants. Very few stay more than one day on account of the climate. As the village is situated at the foot of the mountain, the ascent can be made in about 2 hours to a large country house called El Volador, built on a ridge of the mountain several thousand feet above the river Lebrija. On the top of the mountain the air is fresh and cool, and the climate good. From here to the town of Bucaramanga the journey can be made in 2 days, over a tolerably good mule track, which passes through the midst of many beautiful plantations of coffee, tobacco, and sugar cane. What appears most extraordinary to the traveller when he mounts up to the top of the range of mountains which overlooks the town of Bucaramanga is to find a large town of about 50,000 inhabitants at so great a distance from any port and so thoroughly isolated at the tops of the Andes. The natural situation is very beautiful, the town being built upon an extensive plain about 3,000 feet above the level of the sea, and this plain entirely surrounded by high mountains, and these mountains for a considerable distance up the side adorned with pretty country houses, each one with a patch of sugar cane, a plantation of coffee or tobacco, while as far as the eye can reach is an extent of pastures, enriched with splendid herds of cattle and troops of half-wild horses, while the tops of the mountains tower into the clouds, which shroud them day and night with a veil of impenetrable mist. The plain on which the town is built, as well as most of the adjoining land, has long been celebrated for the gold found there, and especially in the old-fashioned village of Giron, where the Spanish conquerors found sufficient to load their ships with hoards of treasure. The gold is very good, but many of the mines discovered by the Spaniards have been lost or abandoned, and those which remain, although they still yield largely, are not so profitable as in former years. Once inside the town of Bucaramanga, the whole arrangement is most novel. The streets are very narrow and paved, being highest at the sides, and having a stream of water running down the middle of each of the principal thoroughfares, serving at once for the supply of the town and for sanitary purposes. The water is generally taken from some stream in the nearest mountain side and brought by conduits to the town, where in various branches it is made to pass through all the principal streets, and again in hundreds of branches is carried to form the many beautiful baths and fountains which are found in the houses of the rich Colombians. As a rule, the houses which form the suburbs of the town are miserable, tumble-down constructions, and the streets are so uneven that they will scarcely admit of wheeled vehicles passing along them, so that every kind of conveyance, such as cabs, omnibuses, wagons, etc., is entirely unknown in this mountain retreat. The houses are principally 1 story high, and the long streets, in which the whole of the houses seem to have been made from the same model, give the place an appearance of dull sameness, perfectly unbearable to a European. But once inside the door of one of the best of these houses everything is changed. The apartments are built to open into a square or garden, generally cooled by a splashing fountain, and planted with innumerable sweet-smelling flowering shrubs and gorgeous orchids. The largest hall or reception room takes up the whole of the square adjoining the street, so that on the one side the windows overlook the traffic and passers-by, while on the other side large folding doors open to a wealth of floral beauty. These saloons are often most gorgeously furnished. The richest gilding, the choicest pictures, carpets from Persia and draperies from India, with an extravagance in silver and bric-a-brac almost impossible to believe could ever be found on the tops of the Andes. 2 sides of the square are taken up by the bedrooms, which also open into this floral promenade, the remaining side of the square being reserved for the dining room. And on account of the perpetual mildness of the climate, this hall is left entirely open on one side, so that the well-to-do Colombian, instead of requiring floral decorations to adorn his dinner table, literally dines under the shade of orange trees laden with blossom and fruit. Huge gardenias, whose crowds of waxen flowers fill the air with their exquisite perfume, with large clumps of the lovely orchid, Cattleya Mendelii, give to the whole group a masterly finish of colour. The business houses of Bucaramanga are quite equal to any in other parts of Colombia, and a large trade is done in cotton goods and hardware, as well as immense exportation of products of the country. There are many excellent hotels, a club, telegraph and telephone offices, post office and banks are to be found, while the latest novelty for the tops of the Andes is to be the electric light, the machinery being at the time I write this on the way from Europe to be carried up the mountains on the backs of mules. Apart from all this, what strikes the visitor as the most curious of all the curiosities of Bucaramanga is the market, which is held some 3 times a week in the principal plaza, an extensive square in front of the church. Here every Saturday may be found such a collection of products of a diversity of character as is rarely met with. Flesh meat is sold under small tents to protect it from the blaze of the sun, while bales of gutta percha, sacks of coffee, and rolls of tobacco are heaped up in the midst of stores of merchandise from Europe, potatoes and Indian corn, raw sugar and bananas, oranges, peaches, and figs, all jumbled together topsy-turvy. The people are no less remarkable for their diversity of colour, character, and nationality. Here a sharp German trader may be seen bartering with a red Indian over a cent in the price of a pound of coffee, or some elegant Colombian lady jostles with the rough Indians of the hills in the excitement to secure some delicious fruit or extra fine capon. Sisters of Mercy, Roman Catholic priests, a large percentage of Germans, a few Frenchmen and Italians, together with the educated Colombians, negroes, and half-breeds, are all intent upon making the best bargain. The principal trade of the town in the importation of manufactured goods is in the hands of German traders, of which there are many important houses, as well as a few rich Colombians. The educated society of Colombia has always been noted for its capacity and intelligence, and Bucaramanga, besides possessing several good schools and a college, has given to the country from time to time many celebrated men, both in literary, political, and scientific pursuits, while the state of Santander undoubtedly has a population of the most industrious class of people to be found in Colombia. Dr. Aurelio Mutis, one of the most popular inhabitants of Bucaramanga, as well as of this state, was educated in medical colleges in London, Edinburgh, and Paris. He is a man of most affable character, coupled with the sprightly vivacity of the men of his race, polished and accomplished in the highest degree. He speaks fluently Spanish, English, French, and Italian. As a medical man he is equally in request in the palace of the millionaire and the Indian hut, and it is said that in his long experience in this large town of so diversified a class of inhabitants, none ever asked for his help and was turned away. As a political man he has lately become famous, having been for a short time governor of the state, and then secretary for education. He is at present in England, acting as consul for Colombia in the port of Southampton. My journey was made in search of the fairy tribe of orchids, and as up to the present I had not even seen a single plant of value, I was delighted to learn that the early botanists had found the gorgeous Cattleya Mendelii growing around here in profusion. Now, however, through the immense exportation of these plants, not a single one is to be found within many days' journey from here on mules. I accordingly set about hiring mules for myself and baggage, and again started off in search of the capricious flower. This time the way ran along the valley of La Florida, passing on the way large works in progress for taking water to wash the gold-bearing sand of the vicinity. Nearly the whole of the land along the valley is carefully cultivated. The beautiful crops of waving sugar cane, maize, and tobacco, and the rich pastures stocked with peaceful herds of cattle give one a feeling of European surroundings. On each side of the valley the mighty peaks of the Andes tower up to the clouds, all bristling with forest. 12 miles of the most agreeable riding brought us to an old Spanish town called Pie de Cuesta, or in English, Foot of the Hill. This place contains about 12,000 inhabitants, peaceable, industrious people, mostly employed in making cigars and straw hats, as well as in agricultural pursuits. In the whole of my variations in life and circumstances, I have found no town or village I have liked so much as the quiet, beautiful, dreamy old town of Pie de Cuesta, about 3,500 feet above the level of the sea, with something like 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night all the year round, a mild, balmy air which is never oppressively hot or disagreeably cold, an abundance of pure water, and a rich variety of tropical fruits. The majority of the houses are commodious and even spacious, while the people, at the same time possessing all the sprightly wit of the modern Colombian, are free from that knavish, overreaching disposition which develops into a system of roguery in most of the outlying mountain villages. The natural situation of the town is as admirable as the climate and the people are agreeable. I was glad to find the beautiful Epidendrum atropurpureum covering the walls around the houses and flowering in profusion. And here also I found one of the most beautiful of the South American birds, the scarlet and black tanager. This is called here by the natives the cardinal bird, and, compared with a flock of these, no Roman prelate ever made a more brilliant effect. It is a small bird, about the size of a starling, the wings and tail of a velvety black colour, while the rest of the body is a most intense scarlet. The otherwise black beak is adorned with something like plates of ivory on each side of the lower mandible. I was delighted to obtain several good specimens of this gaudy little woodland gem. The mule track, on leaving Pie de Cuesta, keeps along the fertile banks of a stream, in a southern direction, for some miles, and then commences an ascent of about 1,000 feet until we reach what is called La Mesa de los Santos, an extensive plain where the wild Indian must have ranged and camped at will in the time when the Spanish yoke was unknown. The vegetation consists of a tall, rank herbage with occasional scrub, intermixed with thousands of the beautiful Sobralia leucoxantha, with rose and white flowers of the colour and substance of a Cattleya Mendelii, but so difficult to transport that very few of the plants are known in England. The inhabitants of this magnificent plain are mostly cattle keepers, who are possessed of the best class of horses to be found in this part of the country. They are also celebrated for their splendid horsemanship. Every morning they may be seen careering over the expanse of prairie with a lasso of about 30 yards long of raw cowhide tied to the pommel of the saddle, and wearing a pair of very wide leggings which are strapped round them at the waist and float in the wind on either side, something like a lady's dress. These half breeches, half leggings, are called in the Spanish zamarros. The saddle is as peculiar a production as the rest of the arrangement, being raised up very high at the front and back, so that the horseman appears to sit in a chair. A square piece of cloth with a hole cut in the middle for the neck is thrown over the shoulders. This and a wide-brimmed straw hat complete the curious costume of a Colombian cattle ranger. One side of La Mesa de los Santos is bounded by immense precipices, some of them over 200 feet in height. These are the haunts of several birds of prey, most notably the condor, or, as it is called in the Spanish, el buitre. This gigantic bird has a spread of wing of 6 feet, and has strength to rise from the ground with a fair sized calf. I have seen them wheeling around at a considerable height, and they seem to alight on the ground very rarely. The natives' mode of killing them is to slaughter an old horse or other large animal on the edge of a precipice, and the quick-sighted bird is down upon the carcass before life is quite gone. The natives wait in ambush until the monster bird is gorged with the flesh, so as to be unable to rise quickly into the air. The lurking Indian watches his opportunity, and with the agility of a deer falls upon the condor with spears, and generally comes off victorious. On the ledges of these precipices, where the eagle and the condor make their home, the lovely Cattleya Mendelii has grown in profusion since the memory of man. Even when the first plant hunter arrived, these dizzy heights offered no obstacle to his determination to plunder. Natives were let down by means of ropes, and by the same ropes the plants were hauled up in thousands, and when I visited the place all that I could see of its former beauty and wealth of plants was an occasional straggling bulb, hung as if in mid air on some point only accessible to the eagles. I left the place impressed with the magnificence of the scenery, but disappointed in my search for plants. Continuing over the plain, we arrived at a small village of ancient Spanish construction called Los Santos, situated on the very edge of a declivity of about 1,000 feet. In the valley below runs the turbulent little river Subi, formerly called by the Indians the Chicamocha. On the opposite side of the valley mighty precipices rise to the same height as the one on which we stood. It seems as if the river had once flowed over the level plain, but floods during centuries had cut out the terrible chasm which opened so suddenly to the traveller. The distance from one line of precipices to the other, at the top, is about 1.5 miles, and the mule track was down the mountain side, across the river, and up the other side on to the plain beyond. The descent occupied about 1.5 hours of the most perilous winding about amongst rocks and creeping along shelving ledges, where the mules with one false step would have been dashed to pieces. At intervals we came to small huts, the occupation of the owners being to keep goats, of which there were many large herds, nimbly jumping from rock to rock, cropping the scant herbage which scarcely finds room to grow amongst the crowds of American aloes and other prickly cacti. On arriving at the little village called Subi, I was surprised at the great change of temperature. Instead of the fresh, bracing air of the plain, the heat here is intense, the thermometer seldom falling below 100° in the shade. The village has lately become a health resort for invalids suffering from diseases of the skin. Many of the patients may be seen all day bathing in the swift running stream, the waters of which, although coming from the high, cold hills, become warmed in their transit through this burning valley. Here also I found a lovely little bird which I had not seen before, a small creeper about the size of a robin, with dusky brown wings, but having the breast of a brilliant scarlet, and wearing on the head a crest of long feathers of the same gaudy colour, which it raises or lowers at pleasure. I was glad to rest our mules and pass the night here, but long before daylight next morning we began to make the ascent of the precipices on the other side, and by the time the sun was up we had already made half the ascent of the mountain. The view from here is very beautiful. The stupendous rocks may be seen on one side of the chasm, with the immense prairies of La Mesa de los Santos stretching away as far as the eye can reach, losing themselves in the horizon. To the south, one of the tributaries of the river Subi, after creeping along the plain for some distance, suddenly falls over the rocks with a bound of 100 feet, resolving itself into spray and rainbows in the chasm below. I had been informed that Cattleya Mendelii was still to be found in quantities on the eastern range of the Andes, so after leaving the precipices of Subi I turned off in the direction of a small village called Curiti, at the foot of the range of mountains so celebrated for orchids. Here I left my mules and proceeded on foot. The vegetation is somewhat semi-tropical, lovely ferns and selaginellas being very luxuriant, as well as the feathery bamboos, but with an absence of the fine, rich timber trees and towering palms of the lower grounds. Here, amongst the scores of humming birds which flit from flower to flower, I made the acquaintance of one which I had not seen before, and which I believe was the prettiest I had ever seen. This is known in England as the blue sylph, having 2 long feathers in the tail like those of the swallow, but of the most resplendent metallic blue. Here also the rare and beautiful swallow tailed kite may be seen wheeling gracefully overhead all day, but far out of gunshot. I had not far to go before I was rewarded with the object of my search in the myriads of bromeliaceae and orchids which literally cover the short stunted trees and the bare points of rocks, where scarcely an inch of soil is to be found. The most magnificent sight for even the most stoical observer are the immense clumps of Cattleya Mendelii, each new bulb bearing 4 or 5 of its gorgeous rose coloured flowers, many of them growing in the full sun or with very little shade, and possessing a glowing colour which is very difficult to get in the stuffy hot houses where the plants are cultivated. Some of these plants, considering their size and the slowness of growth, must have taken many years to develop, for I have taken plants from the trees with 500 bulbs and as many as 100 spikes of flowers, which to a lover of orchids is a sight worth travelling from Europe to see. Apart from the few extraordinary specimens, the orchids as a rule are very much crowded and mixed up with other vegetation. The accompanying picture from a photograph taken on the spot represents a tree growing in its natural state in the forest. The higher branches are covered with a long white lichen, a little lower is an immense clump of tillandsias, while the branch on the right hand is inhabited by some oncidiums. The next plant lower down is a nice piece of Cattleya Mendelii. The whole of the mountains at this time of my visit were crowded with the famous parasite. Like most of my predecessors, I was tempted to bear away a large quantity of the coveted plants, besides exploring the mountains and enjoying much of their beauty. End of Chapter 8. Recording by Arnold Banner, Thurmond, North Carolina.